one of the conversations we've had over the last 2 days, and some of the IU fans are not liking us right now, but we've been talking about the lack of toughness for this team. Not a lack of ability, not a lack of some other things, but they're not showing the toughness. I think about those teams, those IU teams back then, and that's why Dane said that you would have fit in well with those teams that he played on, and at the end of the 90s, those guys were tough. I mean, they were always tough and scrapping for everything, and we just I'm not seeing that. Don was on with us yesterday, Don Fisher. He talked about that extensively, that he's just not seeing a toughness in his team, and more importantly, what they call what Indiana basketball has always been, that style of play. And I know Indiana basketball hasn't been Indiana for a long time, but that does not mean you have to lose the culture. And part of it, I wonder, is they don't have very many guys on this team that's from Indiana.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's fair to probably define toughness differently now than the 90s, and a lot of that has to do with the rules. I mean, the dumbest rule I've seen in my years of being the Big Ten Network is the hook and hold, right? So Isaac Haas at Purdue, I think, is the only player in the history of our game to ever be injured by a hook and hold. So let's make a completely different rule, and we're going to go over to the monitor for 10 minutes. There's no the cylinder rule right now. When I played at University of Iowa, if you guys remember, we pressed the whole game. We'd go full court 75% of the game, three-quarter 20% of the game. With that first inbounds pass, we would trap, and I was kneeing and thighing guys the whole time and grabbing and clawing, doing everything. You can't even do that anymore. And those type of plays would get you, make you more intense and get you fired up. More volleys, more rallies up and down, not as many whistles. Everybody in the Big Ten back then, seemed like Purdue had more of them. Everybody had an enforcer, and it was just, that's what they did. Were they trying to injure anybody? No, not at all. It was just very physical, hard screens over the back, use their 4 or 5 fouls in their 15 minutes and just do that. So I think the kids today, in a lot of ways, have been restricted from being as tough as they once were. I think Race Thompson, if he played on our teams in the 90s or Bob Knight's teams, I think he would be as tough as it gets. But you move a couple inches on a high ball screen 30 feet from the basket, and you pick up 2 moving screens in the first 2 minutes of the game. I don't know. I'm not making excuses for this generation, but it's just the rules are different. Everybody's terrified of getting an F1 or an F2 and having to sit out and being thrown out of the game, being considered a dirty player, all those things. I do think there is something to be said about recruiting Indiana players who grow up knowing what it means to wear that uniform. And then also Bob Knight he just demanded every ounce of your energy. He demanded everything you had, and if you couldn't bring it, then you'd had to go somewhere else. And it just created a toughness that, a kid like Brian Evans, right? Brian Evans had a wonderful NBA career. He was tough as nails to play against. He was just tough, and he just laid it all out there. Fife was unbelievably tough. I think Thomas Bryant a few years ago was as tough as they got. But you really, it's hard to win if you don't have guys who are extremely physical. Does this team have that? I'm not sure. I'm not sure they do. You guys might be onto something.
Dustin?
Yeah, I was gonna ask Jess. This is an Indiana team that has played a tough schedule. Obviously, they've dealt with the injury bug quite a bit this season. So we don't want to. Basically, what we've seen through the first 13 games, and we don't want to jump to conclusions. Obviously, last year with North Carolina, they didn't play well in the non-conference schedule. They get to the national championship game, right? So anything's possible. What did you see in that Kennesaw State game? What have you seen from Indiana so far through the first 13 games that has stood out to you? Whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, I think one of the things is that this team does have the talent. They were a preseason favorite to win the Big Ten for a reason. Do you think they still fit into that category right now?
I would say no right now because of X's injury. He was obviously a huge part of that. I don't see them necessarily overcoming that over the next 3 or 4 weeks when he's not there to put themselves in a position in the second half to get it done. I like Indiana's team. They have a good team. They need to get a lot better to become a great team. I think if you look back at the Rutgers game, the Arizona game, and the Kansas game, obviously you're not where you have to be and not even close. So before I called the game the other night, I had 4 or 5 days off, and I just poured in like I did when I was a coach. I coached at a small university in Iowa called Iowa Wesleyan University. And so I just poured in as if I was a coach, as if I was scouting those guys, and I watched all those games and charted some of those games. And what I saw, and I briefly talked about it on the air the other night, it appears to me that they're guarding themselves, meaning they're basically running a 3-out, 2-in, and they're running it with Race and TJD and Renew. And the guys who are, if Trace gets the ball, who's ever guarding the 4-man just doesn't guard him. They just plant right in the middle of the lane, and they plug the whole thing up. Race does not have the game and won't this year to face up and hit mid-range jumpers. He's not going to hit 3-point shots. So he's basically going up against 2 or 3 guys. So they're daring Renew and Race to beat him. And against Arizona, Race, I believe, had 4 threes. But other than that game, he's been, let's say, 3 or 4 for 28 from beyond the arc. And so the teams are going to play that way and make him prove that they can that he can hit that shot. Renew plays like a freshman. He's a good freshman, but he plays like a freshman. And the turnovers that he had in those big games, I'm not talking about Elon and Kennesaw State. I'm talking about the games that you have to win if you're going to win the league in the Big Ten. He's not ready for prime time right now to carry those type of minutes and make those plays against those teams. What freshman is, right? So the question is, over these 13 days off, the way I see it, and they did this in the second half quite a bit, and maybe the TJD injury was a blessing in disguise because they can see how this worked. You go 5 out, you go 4 out, 1 in, and you start TJD and you have Race come off the bench backing him up, and you just sub those guys for each other most of the game. Go with your smaller lineup, your shooters. Bates can shoot it, Miller Kopp can shoot it, Hood Schifino can shoot it. When you get X back, obviously he can get to the lane on anybody if he has the space, and you get that space opened up so the guys can drive. You go pick and pop with Race, you go pick and roll with TJD or isolation plays, and you kind of change the way you're thinking offensively because they're just going to load the box and have a guy in the hole the whole time. And the other thing, as I'm rambling on here, just from what I watched, I don't see that they're gaining an advantage right now with that size in the big games. They're getting killed on the glass. They are getting, destroyed in those big games on the glass. Teams come, and I think it's a quickness issue. It's not necessarily just that they're not trying, but when Race is guarding a small forward that he has to chase all over the court and get a hand up, then when that shot goes up, that guy's just flying around. Those guys from Rutgers just went right around those guys. And I think had maybe 14 offensive rebounds in the first half. So that's a tough decision, but I think they had a pretty good sample of in the second half against Kennesaw State, where they kept Race out of the paint, just kept him up top for pick and pops, pick and pass, rolled him once in a while. And then Hood Schifino, he's a big guard. He turns the corner, and there aren't 2 other bigs loading the box because they have to be out guarding Trace and especially Race on the perimeter. And to me, that's the formula. If they do that, I think they have a chance to have a really good year. If they don't, I think it's going to be a struggle.
You mentioned Jalen Hood-Schifino, a freshman guard who is now going to have to carry a lot more of the load with that injury to Xavier. If X is able to come back at the end of the year, nothing about that. He just had surgery, so you just got to plan that this is how it's going to be until it's not that way. But Jalen Hood he's had some ebbs and flows, but he's played pretty well for a freshman. But now he's going to have to step it up and play even better, I'd say, with taking all that load on and maneuvering this offense that you talk about to where it is a faster offense that creates more issues for the defense because that's what they haven't been doing. They've created no problems for defenses because they're playing right into their hands, basically. And you talked about some of the things that they can do and that I think a lot of people would like them to see them do. Trey Jackson Davis, his unwillingness to shoot the ball from 10, 12 feet, I think is really also helping bog that middle up as well. I cannot understand nothing to make me understand why he doesn't have the confidence to shoot from 8 feet. I mean, you shoot a free throw, shoot an 8-footer, shoot an elbow jumper. I mean, I don't care. Shoot 4 in a row, miss 4 in a row, but take them, make them try to respect that. But is there an impact there, do you think?
I think it's I think you are who you are at this point in your career, right? I mean, I'm sure Fish has talked about this many times, and you're not. I just don't see him coming out in the second half being taking mid-range jumpers, which is okay. You know, I wish he did have that part of his game. Then he truly would be a first-team All-American level dominant player, because I mean you gotta respect him going to the rim, and teams are so worried about him, and they load up and they send 2 guys. If you just turn around and hit that little Calvert Chaney baseline face up, right, you'd just be unstoppable. But I still think he's an elite guy rolling to the basket, and he does set pretty good screens. And Hood Schifino, from sitting courtside the other night, man, he's impressive when he turns the corner. If he can turn the corner and then have shooters around him and where he can bully his way to the basket, have that lane opened up, hit shooters, I think that would be – I think that's just the way they've got to do it. I think if Race and TJD and Renew are on the court together, it's just like playing against the zone the whole night. And one thing as a coach, I mean, Trace has the right coach. I mean, Coach Woodson, I mean, there's no better guy for him to be around, just from the neck up and mid-range jumpers and all the way that he used to play. It's always fascinating when you're a coach. I think when you're a former good player, or you've had success as a player, the mistake you make when you go into coaching is you think you can make guys become something that they don't want to be. And maybe a Bo Ryan and maybe a Bob Knight are outliers. Maybe they can, but most of us, you try it, you pour into it, and then you finally just accept, hey, this guy can't do this. He's not going to do this. Let's work on his strength and focus on what he can do to help us win. And that's probably where they're at right now with those personnel decisions.
Yes, I wanted to ask, we're just a few days away from really diving headfirst into the bulk of the Big Ten season, the really fun time of the college basketball schedule. Which teams have stood out to you? Which team do you think in the Big Ten is best to make a push for the Big Ten title, and then maybe have a shot at the Final Four this year?
Well, it looks to me right now that Purdue is just, literally and figuratively head and shoulders above everybody else. Edey is a problem. He has gotten so much better. And he has a ton of game right now. They've been really tested. It was funny the other night we were talking about the high school games during the broadcast. There's just so many Purdue fans jump in there as well. I think the Purdue volleyball coach tweeted out something about a couple of the teams. And I even think the Butler tennis coach jumped in on the conversation. So look, Purdue people, they don't want to be left out of this Hoosier hysteria, right? At the high school level, they're all a part of this. But Purdue, just the way they move the ball, the schedule that they played, they look really good. After that, I mean, I think there's 4 or 5 teams in there that are about the same. Michigan's shown to be pretty tough. Michigan State up and down, but they're going to get better. Maybe Wisconsin is the second best team in the league, which is hard to believe. But Wall is one of those guys, and he's a lot like TJD, where he doesn't rely on a jump shot, but he's just filthy around the rim. He's just all kinds of moves. They don't turn the ball over, right? It's the same formula. They don't foul. They make their open shots. They don't beat themselves. But it's going to be wide open, especially if Edey gets in foul trouble or picks up some injuries, gets banged up as the year goes on.